London boasts an annual GDP exceeding $500 billion, making it the wealthiest region in Northern Europe. If it were a country, its GDP would surpass that of Norway. But how does the rest of the UK compare? Without London, the nation's GDP per capita would fall below that of Mississippi, the poorest state in the United States. Surprisingly, among Northern Europe's poorest regions, the 10th poorest is in the UK, the 9th in Belgium, and all others are also in the UK. Large parts of the country struggle with economic challenges, resembling middle-income developing countries like Poland, though with a far higher cost of living. The UK ranks second only to Switzerland in childcare expenses, with couples spending nearly 30% of their income on childcare. This financial strain is exacerbated by wages that have failed to keep pace with inflation. Incomes have dropped by about 3%, marking one of the worst wage growth rates among OECD nations. Even Greece, which experienced a severe economic crisis, saw a slightly smaller decline. What's more alarming is the growing gap between rich and poor. For every $1 earned by someone in the bottom 90%, those in the top 1% earn $1.7 million. Today, 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 3 children live in poverty. Even London, with its booming economy and tripled wages since the 1990s, grapples with poverty. Housing prices have surged sevenfold, leaving nearly a third of inner Londoners in poverty and doubling the number of homeless people over the last decade. How did the UK, once the world's most prosperous nation, find itself in such a state? What led to this stark contrast between wealth and poverty? This is the story of how the UK became both one of Europe's richest and poorest nations. Income inequality has long been a pressing issue, but today it has reached stark levels. The top 20% of earners now take home more than a third of all income, while the top 1% alone accounts for 8%. Over the decades, the income share of the top 20% has remained relatively stable, but the top 1% has doubled their portion since the 1970s. Back then, the UK was a very different place. Poverty existed, but it affected half as many children as today. Homelessness was far less common, with 20 times fewer people sleeping on the streets. However, the economy was struggling. Once the industrial powerhouse of Europe, the UK had seen its dominance wane by the 1950s and 60s as other European nations surged ahead. Its reluctance to collaborate closely with neighboring countries only exacerbated the issue. When the UK joined the EU in 1973, it lagged economically behind most European countries in the OECD, with only Portugal, Greece, Ireland, and Spain showing lower GDP per capita. Membership in the EU was seen as a step forward and supported by 2/3 of voters in a referendum. This marked the beginning of a shift from a state-controlled industrial economy to a service-oriented, privatized economy. While these changes halted the UK's economic decline, they also paved the way for a more unequal distribution of wealth. In the late 1970s, the UK was as economically equal as nations like Denmark and the Netherlands are today. Its Gini index, a measure of income inequality, stood at 27% in 1977. But the 1980s brought a dramatic rise in inequality, which plateaued from the 1990s onward, peaking in 2009. Today, the UK ranks as the most unequal wealthy country globally after the United States. This shift in inequality mirrored a cultural shift in governance. The UK fostered a more individualistic society, rewarding personal gain while relying on financial systems that enabled a small elite to concentrate wealth. Major national assets, water, electricity, gas, and even infrastructure, were privatized, transferring them into the hands of a select few. As a result, 90% of national assets are now privately owned, making the UK one of the most narrowly owned economies among developed nations. This transformation has left the UK grappling with the legacy of inequality, a challenge that continues to shape its social and economic landscape. Since the early 1990s, the inequality trend in the UK has become increasingly erratic, shaped by global and domestic events. The late 2000s financial crisis and the 2020 pandemic caused significant disruptions, and the long-term effects of Brexit remain a hot topic. By early 2024, a government report revealed the stark toll: the loss of 2 million jobs and a £140 billion, $180 billion, economic contraction. The regional impacts of these changes tell a more complex story. When comparing UK regions against the national average, richer areas like London and the South East saw greater declines in wages, while traditionally weaker regions like Northern Ireland fared comparatively better. Employment growth also painted a mixed picture. London and Northern Ireland performed relatively well, while the wealthier South East lagged behind. Over the decades, the British economy has increasingly favored the already affluent. Asset prices have steadily risen, enriching older generations and making wealth accumulation far more challenging for the young. By 2023, the wealth of the 50 richest families matched that of half the entire British population. This growing wealth disparity has fueled a surge in poverty. Last year marked the steepest rise in poverty in 3 decades, with nearly 1 in 5 people and 1 in 3 children now living in absolute poverty. Additionally, 1 in 7 adults faces food insecurity, struggling to access enough food to meet basic needs. The United Kingdom, once a beacon of prosperity and economic leadership, now teeters on the edge. London's economy continues to thrive, and the wealthy are growing significantly richer, but these gains are not shared by the wider population. This divergence raises urgent questions about the nation's future. If we compare GDP per capita across the top-performing regions of the UK, Germany, the Netherlands, and the United States, cities like London, Munich, Amsterdam, and San Francisco stand out as economic powerhouses. Each significantly exceeds their respective national averages, shown by the blue lines. However, when these top regions are excluded, the drop in national averages varies dramatically. Germany's average remains largely unchanged, reflecting a well-distributed economy. In contrast, the UK's average plummets by 14%, highlighting the disproportionate economic weight of London. This is further emphasized on the map, where the UK stands out as home to both the richest region in Northern Europe, London, and 9 of the 10 poorest. London alone generates nearly a quarter of the UK's GDP and ranks as one of the world's top financial hubs. Its economy is dominated by service industries, particularly finance and professional services, employing 85% of its residents. London's native use of English and its advantageous time zone position it as a global bridge between Asia and North America. It is the 7th largest metropolitan economy worldwide, following 6 U.S. cities. While London's success benefits the national economy by contributing disproportionately to central government revenue, this concentration of wealth comes at a cost. The UK's pronounced regional inequality has tangible effects. Its citizens are less healthy, less happy, and face greater insecurity compared to those in countries like Germany and France. Outside London, the UK's GDP per capita aligns with Italy and Spain, while its weakest regions, home to 20% of the population, perform comparably to Slovenia and Estonia. After decades of failing to distribute wealth equitably, the UK's economic standing raises questions. Does it still belong in the same league as Northern European countries like Germany and France? Or should it now be considered alongside Southern Europe's economies? With Eastern Europe continuing its rapid growth, comparisons with nations like Slovenia or Poland may soon become more apt.